Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat, and on this episode, I am joined by Lynn Wilhite. She was previously on the Mom and Mind podcast on episode 263, where she shared her experience through treatment-resistant depression in the postpartum period. And since she's been on our podcast, she's found out that she has a diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and she was dealing with PTSD after the birth of her son. And today she's sharing with us what it's been like to learn of that diagnosis and how she's making connections for herself on why things had been so difficult for her. Aside from just experiencing the postpartum depression, how the layers and factors related to ADHD and autism complicated her story. Lynn has taken a pause from her work as a therapist and social worker to work on her own healing, understand her diagnosis of autism, ADHD, PTSD, and also learn more about her son's diagnosis of autism. Lynn discovered her own neurodivergence through seeing what her son was going through in his neurodivergence. Lynn is now passionate about bringing neurodivergence into the postpartum conversation and normalizing and destigmatizing autism and other forms of neurodivergence, especially for new moms. And she is currently in the process of writing a book on her postpartum and parenthood journey. So I'd like to welcome back Lynn. Welcome back, Lynn. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, I in particular love that you're coming back because you've learned a lot about yourself and your experience since the first time we met. And I think your experience is also similar to a lot of other people. I'm sure you're getting people reaching out to you about that. Catch us up. Let us know
hmm
what's been going on.
Yeah, so the last time we talked, I don't remember exactly how old my son was, but I had been experiencing kind of what they were calling treatment-resistant depression and
Mhm.
postpartum depression, that is, and had tried so many different things and just wasn't finding relief. And at the same time was kind of starting to undergo getting a psychological evaluation for my son, who from pretty early on I suspected had autism.
Mhm.
So since we met last, I've had both a psychological evaluation for my son and one for me, and we
Mhm.
both have been diagnosed with autism.
Mhm.
And along with autism, we've both been diagnosed with ADHD as well.
Mhm.
So we've got the double whammy of
Mhm.
neurodivergence, and so I've learned a lot about being neurodivergent,
Yeah.
about neurodivergent parenting,
Mhm.
about my son being neurodivergent,
Mhm.
about how those two things kind of clash sometimes
Mhm.
when our needs kind of butt up against each other.
Right.
All kinds of stuff. So, but that's kind of in a nutshell. Kind of what I've learned is that a lot of my depression and a lot of my symptoms. Don't get me wrong, I still had postpartum depression and anxiety and things like that, but I also kind of was compounded with this neurodivergence that wasn't diagnosed until I was 36.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Um. Oh wow. So yeah, that you suffered for a long time,
Yes.
a
Yes. So
really long time.
my son is now 4.5. He'll be 5 soon.
Mhm.
And I'm still kind of in the thick of figuring out what is postpartum life, getting meds still figured out, So
Mhm.
I've been suffering since pregnancy with him.
So I mean, this is a lot. What was that like for you to start to understand what was going on when you like maybe even the first when you first got the evaluation results back and had that conversation? What was that like for
Yeah.
you?
And let me bring back even more, like,
Mhm.
the only reason I knew to even think this about myself was I had a page the last time we talked on Instagram that was a postpartum depression page that was like a
Mhm.
perinatal mental health awareness page. And
Mhm.
I started getting a lot of things shown on my news feed of parents of autistic children, because that's kind of what I was searching for my son at the time.
Uh-huh. Oh, right.
That started bringing up pages of autistic parents and
Mhm.
mothers who were specifically getting diagnosed alongside their children.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how that just like first the idea came to me, because I
Oh, sure.
had no awareness, of course. I went my whole life this way. I knew how to, now I know that I've been masking very highly my entire life. And so,
Mm,
there was nothing in me that thought, oh, that's what's going on. Like
sure.
it took a lot of repeated posts and things that I saw online from other mothers to kind of think, oh, maybe I should seek out a psychological evaluation. Maybe
Mm,
this is the right track that I'm kind of thinking I'm seeing myself in these people, and maybe
mhm.
that's where I should go. So I went to the psychologist that was recommended in our local area for late diagnosed women specifically, which is
Oh,
really important.
that's great. Like a
Because
specialist.
yeah,
That amazing. Great.
yes, I knew that I needed to, because I'm a social worker, I know just enough to make me dangerous. And so, like, I knew I needed to go to someone who wasn't, daily just diagnosing children, or, I knew I needed to go to someone that would maybe have some sense of how it would present in me.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and how I could have been missed this long. And so yeah, so I found someone through the grapevine who specialized in adults and especially women. And so went to her, did a full few days of diagnostic testing, the full, full thing.
Mhm.
Um, Waited a few weeks, and that few weeks of waiting was quite hard
Yeah.
because that whole time I was burning out at my current. I was working at a hospital, actually, in a NICU, doing what I love, but burning out,
Right.
and
Right.
not exactly knowing why I was burning out so fast at every job I was taking.
Mhm.
And so that wait to get the diagnosis was kind of excruciating. And
Mhm.
finally met with a psychologist, sat down, and she had this paper, the stack of papers, and she wanted to go through the cognitive testing and all these things, like, here's your IQ, and I was just like, I'm so sorry, but I can't focus on a thing you're saying. Could you get first to the diagnosis,
Yeah.
and then we can kind of come back and talk about all this other stuff? But I am
Sure.
just on pins and needles wanting to know, like, was my instinct right,
Uh-huh. Sure.
so we got to the diagnostic, and she said, yep, I think you're absolutely autistic. I also think you've got ADHD going on. And then we talked about mood disorder with our postpartum depression and stuff like that too. So, and then PTSD from the hospital stay postpartum,
Right.
which was officially diagnosed by her. So that's a fun bonus
Right.
that I had postpartum. So I got all that officially diagnosed, but then we went back and we talked about the details and stuff. But getting that diagnosis, as soon as I was done talking to the psychologist, I went to my car. I was on a break from work,
Mhm.
had to go right back to work.
Oh
And
my gosh.
um, so I sat in my car and I just started crying.
Yeah.
And it was a mixture of relief and
Mhm.
weight of, oh my God, thinking of me as a little girl,
Mhm.
thinking of that little
Oh,
girl who struggled so
yes.
hard and
Yeah.
didn't know why.
Yeah.
And it all started just kind of making sense. And I just, it was a lot. It's a big piece of your identity once you find that out.
Right.
And so
Right.
getting that, it's huge. It
Right.
doesn't change anything overnight, but it's
Right.
huge getting that news.
Right. So,
Yeah.
like this kind of like flash through your life
Like your life, like
review.
reviewing your
Mhm.
life. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm sure like moments like that will still come up as you're reflecting on it. Um, and I'm also curious because to know, mm, how can I say it? So there's like one sort of idea or stereotype of what autism is. It's a very narrow view, I would say, of autism, and in terms of what people know about it,
Mhm.
and many other things. What was kind of grappling with that any part of what you were dealing with, or had you already learned quite a bit from supporting your son, so that you'd already adjusted what autism can look like and feel like?
It was hard. I don't know if this is kind of what you're asking, but to, it was definitely and still is hard for me to accept that I'm autistic,
Mm,
because I don't look like the stereotypical, what we as a society at large kind of think of when we think of autism and what the
hmm.
movies portray and that
Right.
kind of thing. We
Right.
don't talk about late diagnosed moms,
Hmm.
and how female autism looks a lot different many times, or female or identifying autism looks a lot different than it can look in others. So um, I still kind of struggle with imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And even though I see online this huge community of moms who've been diagnosed and their experiences mimic mine to a T,
Hmm.
and I'm like, okay, I'm in good company, but I still I get the responses from family members, friends, people on the internet were very not what I expected. A lot of people didn't want to think that I could be autistic, I think, because they knew me for 36 years as not autistic. And I was coming to them and kind of saying, here's a new piece of my identity. And that
Hmm.
was just, I think for some people, they just didn't, because it wasn't so stereotypical presentation, like I
Right.
think they just didn't
Right.
want to accept it. So it's forced me to really have to stand strong and like, no, 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 no. Psychologist diagnosed me with autism. I know that my struggles are, so I've had to really stand strong in
Yeah.
my new identity, but that has definitely messed with me and my,
Absolutely.
yeah, my
It's
ability to just stay strong in like my new identity and then
mhm.
figure out what the path forward is and that kind of thing because people still are just like, well, in my day we just called people weird. Like I got that response.
Oh no.
I got that response,
Oh,
and both about me and my son. And
what?
it's so, I when I got the diagnosis, I was so relieved and again crying and
Yeah.
because I was like I knew something was going on. I didn't know what all the
Right.
time, but I
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
something else besides depression was going on. And so for me, the diagnosis was huge and life changing and so welcome. And so I think for a lot of people, they didn't understand why I was so happy to have that diagnosis, and they wanted to just belittle it. And yeah, so that's been the stereotype of autism has been really sad and hard to just
Hmm.
like see that we still have as a society.
Right. Right. And mm, I think maybe I said this before, but it seems like such a narrow view
Yes.
of what it is and um how differently it can look on different people, but also there's so many similarities,
Mhm.
across people's experiences. I mean, one thing that's particularly difficult amongst many things is having this idea that you now have to sort of like convince people or teach people, almost like defend yourself in a weird
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
When you're,
And now
I
my
mean,
son too.
ugh, that, I mean,
So it's
to
like a
me, that would
double,
be
it's a twofer.
painful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a constant game of, I don't want to call it a game, but it feels like I'm constantly playing a game of defending both me and my son's disability,
Mhm.
really,
Mhm.
and more for my son than myself. Obviously, I could care less if it's just me, but when it comes to my son and his future, and I get very defensive of people not understanding autism, belittling it, not thinking it's a disability, not almost blaming. I've had a lot of, this is kind of getting into being a parent of a autistic child, but they kind of for me go hand in hand. um, Having to defend my choice to even get him a psychological evaluation, like that choice has been controversial in,
Why?
I'm in the Midwest and we're not always super advanced in mental health.
Okay.
And I've had to kind of defend in direct and indirect ways why I chose to get my son a diagnosis, because there's a lot of people out there who, now that I can see autism more clearly, there's a lot of kids that I can see like, oh, they might be on the spectrum. And I think their parents sometimes are happily ignorant of that and
Mhm.
don't want to add
Mhm.
that to their lives, you
Sure.
know?
Okay.
And so I've met a lot of just, like, why kind of do you want to put that label on you? Why do you want to put that label on your son? Like that kind of rhetoric has been strong since getting both of our diagnoses.
That's so judgmental. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
uh, yeah, really judgy.
Yeah.
As if you're doing something wrong
Yes.
or bad to your child. which is like us sitting here know, and you
Mhm.
know way more than I do that the it's actually supportive of them and their development and getting them the resources and support that helps them to thrive. And like it's a very loving thing to do, to get support and resources and help for your child. Oof.
And the other thing that goes along with that is like and you might be getting to that, but the medical gaslighting throughout this process is, I think for women, and I can't imagine like women of color, and just the gaslighting that happens when you're either advocating for yourself for something like this, or your child, or both, is so for almost 5 years now, because I knew from very early on that something was going on with my son, and constantly was met with just, no, he's fine. Like pediatricians, developmental pediatricians, occupational therapists, speech therapists. Like he had the gamut of providers. And every time I would bring up the thought of autism, or this inkling that I had that like I think there's something more here than just he's a little late to walk. Like it always felt like there was something. I always knew it was autism, really. But
Mhm.
the gaslighting that happens when they almost laugh you off repeatedly, not just one time and not just in passing or something, but like you come to them with legitimate concern, and
Yeah.
they're the experts, but they're basically telling you as the parent that you're just anxious, or you have postpartum anxiety, you're a new mom, you only have one kid, it's that kind of response.
What
And I
are they
can't tell you
implying?
that I didn't know my child, that I
But
didn't know what
like
I
you
was
only have
seeing.
one kid?
I've gotten that a lot, that like I have nothing to compare it to because I have one child. So, I'm a new mom with one child. What do I really know?
Oh,
This is my experience of parenting, and I'm just an anxious mom. And I got that a lot, because I had a history of mental health that I was very open about. And that kind of came back to bite me sometimes. So there's just so much room for growth, and so much room for changing our opinions and the way we tackle neurodivergence, and
mhm.
along with all mental health, but neurodivergence, especially for parents, and especially for new moms who are struggling.
Mhm.
It's just, yeah, we have a lot of room to grow.
Right. And of course there's, challenges and difficulties and that like you were able to reflect on and see like, oh, that's why that was hard or and for your own experience. But there's something um more for sure about the pregnancy postpartum. I mean, I don't know all of what's going on and like why that was sort of like mm, what's going on in our brains and bodies that makes it
Mhm.
so much worse, so much
Mhm.
harder rather.
Mhm.
But there are all these other contextual factors that make it harder, like um, yeah, just for me anyways, just thinking like all the noise, all the sound, all the like um, having my own sensitivities and how that is overstimulating and all of that stuff.
Yes.
For you and your experience looking back, what were the things that, although I know you can't like really tease everything apart, what from what you know now,
Mhm.
how did autism contribute to the challenges of pregnancy and postpartum?
Good question. I wrote some things down because that was kind of what I was thinking on before we met, and these were both what made, I think, postpartum and pregnancy hard, and also signs to me that I was autistic, in
Mm-hmm.
reflecting back. So,
Okay, yeah.
um, one of them, my need for routine,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's common for a lot of autistic individuals, the need for routine, and like if plans would change prior to even pregnancy, if plans would change last minute, it was just my anxiety was off the charts. If a place that we were going to go to dinner changed, it was like, oh no, no, we were planning on going to. For some reason, that is a very stressful thing for me. Very common for autistic individuals. So having a child that is not on a schedule and cries at all times. And my son, especially, who was colicky, um, and was very hard to soothe. I had no, I just had no routine. We couldn't get a routine down. The sleeplessness, sleep for a lot of autistic individuals is A, hard to come by a lot of times, and then B, very important when you do get the sleep.
Mm.
And for me, that's very true. So the lack of sleep with postpartum was a huge one. Uh, the sensory sensitivities, like you said, like sound was a big one. The crying, my husband's ADHD, so we're both neurodivergent, and we've both learned a lot about ourselves, and we
Mhm.
both got headphones postpartum, because the crying was pretty consistent and nonstop,
Mhm.
and we were doing everything we could, and it wasn't stopping. So someone actually suggested that we get some noise canceling headphones to wear
Mhm.
every so often to kind of give ourselves a break.
Mhm.
So we did that. Touch. My son didn't like to be touched. I love to be touched, and that was my love language. Autistic individuals kind of vary on this, and
Mhm.
so, like, the incompatibility of my son and I in that way,
Right.
this picture I had of I was gonna cuddle with my son and hold
Mhm.
him, and that was
Mhm.
gonna keep him calm, right? Like, that was
Mhm.
gonna my warmth or whatever they say for
Mhm.
skin to skin after birth and, all that stuff. I just had this idea that, "Oh, okay, so I'm gonna be able to soothe him with my physical presence,"
Mhm.
and that wasn't happening with him, and so that feedback then that I got was really sad and hard to deal with. Very, you know, I think those are some of the things that postpartum made it really hard.
Did
And
that
then
in
I've
particular, sorry to interrupt,
no, yeah,
the touch part,
yeah.
the I guess mismatch between your needs,
Mhm.
um, did that make it hard to feel connected to him?
Very much so, and
Mhm.
has almost like we're still almost working on our connection, I think, to this day,
Right.
just because the early part of our relationship was so rocky in that
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
because he was so upset and didn't want to be touched, and I was so upset. I wanted to hold him.
Mhm.
There was from the very on, there was almost like an attachment for me, maybe not so much for him, but I think for me, like an attachment rupture or something
Mhm.
that was like, "Oh, no, he doesn't love me," and this
Gotcha.
fear
Right.
that I just wasn't a good enough mom and that kinda stuff. So, I'm still working on kinda getting
Mhm.
over that because he's still, as being almost 5, we still have a lot of sensory mismatches,
Mhm.
between us, and he still doesn't really like to be touched, and
Mhm.
he can vocalize better now and stuff like that, and it makes it a little easier, but there's still things that it takes a lot of learning to just, like, kind of readjust your expectation of what parenthood was gonna be and what, you thought your connection was gonna be like with your child and how
Right.
you would receive love and give love and all that stuff.
Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
can just sort of extrapolating from in my mind different potential scenarios of like how that would contribute to feeling more depressed or feeling more
Yes.
anxious. Like just the feeling that like you can't do the thing that you feel
You
driven
were
to
like,
do.
yeah, you were you made this human, you birthed this human,
Hmm.
and yet you can't do then the next job, which is comforting this human, right? Like, it feels like that is your main it is your main in that especially period, postpartum, that's your
Hmm.
main job
Hmm.
is to comfort and keep care of this human, and I felt like I was immensely failing, and that was so depressing.
What
So,
can
yeah.
what um I'm thinking right now of like somebody who might be listening who can identify with some of the stuff you're talking about. Um, are there things that you noticed like within your maybe reflecting on it, but that you noticed yourself that maybe other people didn't notice? Um, that cued you in additionally, like
To my autism or
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
okay, okay, yeah. Um, I it's been in more reflection because,
Mm,
like I said, the first few years, I had no idea really about I only knew what everyone knew about autism. In school for social work, we learned maybe one class, we spent a little bit of time in the DSM on autism. I mean, the understanding of autism is not good. It
Mm-mm.
really, you have to specialize in it to really know much beyond our general understanding. So, the first few years, I didn't know what was going on. I think that's what made it harder. Is like I just again thought I was a bad mom, or
Mm-hmm.
or thought something was wrong with my child. So both kind of were going on. But in looking back, um, needing a lot of alone time, needing a lot of alone time, a lot of time to reset. I felt guilty
Mm-hmm.
postpartum and beyond, needing that time. And now that I've been diagnosed with autism and I understand my sensory issues, and I understand that a lot of people with autism need that downtime and that reset time and that just alone time and isolation time after like a social interaction or whatever. Um, I'm trying to work on that guilt, but that mom guilt of, okay, right now I don't really want to be around my child. And that was immensely shameful for me, and I couldn't really talk about it. I didn't feel like I could talk about it, and because, I was around all these Instagram posts that were, I get all these baby snuggles, and I'm so happy, and, and,
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of crying and a lot of time where I just needed to go lay down for 30 minutes and, like, decompress and have no sound and just be alone. I just needed to be alone. I just
Mm-hmm.
needed time, and that and still is something that the mom guilt is rough. And so looking back, that contributed to the guilt, to the depression. But it's something that I'm working on now, knowing that that's not, my fault. That's not making me a bad mom. That's just my nervous system and kind of the way my brain is wired, and that's what I need. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would tell moms out there that are kind of experiencing similar things and maybe have sensory sensitivities and are hearing a little bit of themselves in this, like, to really work on that mom guilt of
Mm-hmm.
not feeling bad about saying, you know what, I need a break from this crying baby, or I need a break from my toddler, or, like, that's okay. And that's, most
Yep.
of us do, even not neurodivergent. So,
Absolutely. Right.
to work as hard as you can on that mom guilt, and be kind, give yourself grace,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the big things that was hard for me, before I knew what that was. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Um, yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. Um, yeah.
Yeah. From what you're describing, I imagine, and this is my assumption, but that it would feel very isolating or lonely in some way. Are those correct words or
Yes.
feelings?
Yes. Felt this whole postpartum motherhood experience has felt very isolating
Mm.
and very, like, why am I this random unicorn? Not, and I don't think of myself as a unicorn, it's probably
Mm-hmm.
more negative terms typically, but why am I this, person that doesn't seem to match with what everyone else is experiencing? Why is my experience so unique, or so, um, I could use more negative terms when I'm feeling more depressed, but, like,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on with me?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, this, sorry, I forgot what the original question was now.
Oh, that it could feel isolating or
Isolating, yeah.
lonely.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's very isolating because you're just like, I can't talk to anybody about this. Every one of my girlfriends or my cousins or whoever is having children around the same time as me, seemingly, and again, we don't know, but, like, seemingly on the surface on their Instagram or Facebook profiles, doesn't seem to be going through what I'm going through. I
Mm-hmm.
know they're not being told they need to go get ECT, like shock therapy, for their postpartum depression 3 years out. I know that they have more moments of happiness than I seem to be having. Their children, I'm thinking of one person in particular that I would kind of compare, because we were on the same timeline, a family member, and I would compare our kind of posts online, and that's awful. But, I would do that, and I would say, "Oh, it looks like her child can go to a bounce house and be fine. My child is." terrified of bounce houses, and the
Mm-hmm.
noise and the people scare him to death. We've never
Mm-hmm.
been to a bounce house, so I would compare our experiences, and it was always so isolating because it's just, you feel like no one else gets it, and
Mm-hmm.
that you're the only one, and you're just some kind of, like, quite honestly, like a monster. You're like, what's wrong with me? Um, and you feel like then you start to question your decision to have a child, quite honestly. And that's
Well,
something people don't talk about. But
yeah, can you say more about that? Like,
yeah,
what do you mean?
you start to say, well, I must, so many things, but you
Mm-hmm.
start to question whether you were supposed to be a mother, right?
Oh,
Like,
oh, these are like existential, like
existential,
deep, deep stuff.
like,
Okay.
should I have had a child because I clearly am not doing the same thing as my neighbor, or
Oh.
this happy family to my left, where I'm very isolated, alone feeling. My experiences seem to be very unique.
Mm.
And so then you just start kind of going down with your postpartum depression and stuff. You can start going down the rabbit hole of, like, what okay, what was I doing thinking that I was going to be fine having a child? What Why did I
Yep.
think I was going to be an okay mom? Because clearly this isn't working, and I'm not a good enough mother, and so you start spiraling and
Mhm.
thinking all these, for at least for me, and I think for maybe a lot of autistic individuals, these existential
Mhm.
questions of yeah, whether you should have just, just being down on yourself, being like, oh, I shouldn't have had a child. I'm not cut out for it. I'm
Mhm.
not, that kind of stuff.
Um, so if there's um okay, just I guess full disclosure, I'm not an expert on autism, so I'm
Mhm.
going to ask a question about it. In terms of depression and anxiety, being like a comorbid or coming along with
Mm,
autism,
mhm.
pardon me, anyways, is
Yeah.
that a
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From my, and again, I'm no expert either. I'm learning, but from my what I know, uh, mental health things like depression and anxiety are highly comorbid with
Mhm.
autism. And another fact that I've learned that is really, something we need to work on, just raising awareness for, is along with that, suicide rates for autistic
Mhm.
individuals are incredibly high. Um, so yes, so it's no surprise that I was dealing with depression and anxiety. I think most autistic individuals are at a much higher rate for mental health conditions.
Okay. Right. So if there's I guess if that's like maybe underlying already,
Hmm.
and then, get pregnant and I don't who knows what the hormones
Hormones,
are
I think,
doing.
also have been found to, potentially play roles with autism. We don't know enough yet, but I think that's a big potential there too.
It's like it's almost just like throwing fuel on a
Yeah.
fire. Um, anything that was already there, it sounds like just becomes magnified or way more
Yeah.
intense,
Yeah. Yeah.
and kind of untenable, like um, really difficult to manage anymore.
Yes, your nervous system just goes crazy, I feel like.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
like if you're and yeah, like if you're already dealing with depression or some dysthymia, which I kind of was pre-pregnancy. I didn't
Hmm.
realize with the autism and stuff, but yeah, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. I think getting pregnant, the hormones, the stress of it, your body changing, that sensory. I mean, no one talks
Oh,
about I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
even
yeah,
the
yeah.
neurotypical people, like, my clothes don't fit anymore, but, like, then having the autistic, like, sensory sensitivity of clothes already, and feeling like your body, like, that's really hard for an autistic individual, I think, of for an autistic mom, your body changing in pregnancy, and
Mm.
just that physical sensory feeling of such a rapid change in your body, and the way clothes feel, and the way you feel, and just it's it's very difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, right. So, in you mentioned before masking, and that you
Yes.
had to develop masking, meaning for people who are learning about the term, you can describe it. Also, just basically that like you're kind of have to pretend like you're better, feeling better than you are, or doing better
Mhm.
than you are,
Or fit in, do
or
the
fit
things that
in.
you see people around you doing.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, so. if you're already like it would become difficult, like really difficult to do the masking stuff. And also you're having, I think, to learn like a whole new set of masking skills or tools or whatever. I don't want to say masking um is like the right thing to do by
Right,
saying
right.
that. That's not what I mean. But like if your goal is to have that feeling of fitting in, you're also having to learn a whole new set of doing that. For really
Hmm.
lack of a better way of putting it, it's just like another
Yeah.
pressure.
You, by the time you, for me, I got pregnant at around 33 or so. Um, by the time you get to that point in your life without being diagnosed, your masking skills are probably, if especially if you're, the autistic community doesn't love, I don't think, using these terms anymore, but high functioning autism versus more, they like to say high needs or low needs, I think
Mm-hmm.
is kind of where they're going. But, um, I was obviously more like low support needs, autistic individual prior to my diagnosis, but highly masking. So I, by the age of 33, had kind of had it down pat as far as like, this is what you do in this situation. And I had people in my life that wanted me to mask without knowing I was neurodivergent. They just were very much about appearances. And so I had a kind of extra crash course as a child in high masking and that being very important to the
Mm-hmm.
world and to others. And so there's a lot of unpacking to do there, but
Yeah, yeah.
so by the time before you get pregnant, you're kind of your own expert in how you mask,
Mm-hmm.
and I had gotten to a decent place in my life and multiple degrees, and so you, by outward appearances, you succeeded, right? You get pregnant, you become a mom, and it's like, for me at least, the rug is taken out from under you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like you can't do anything anymore. Like you're starting over. It's almost like you're learning everything over again.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because you're learning to be, a mother is born the minute the baby is born, right?
Right,
So none of us know how to be a mother until that
right,
comes.
right.
And then I think you add the masking on top of that. You're trying to navigate how to mask your struggles
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
while you're a new mom. And that was just, and again, that's where the isolation comes in. I basically just started isolating because it was pretty impossible to mask my depression, my struggles, my everything. And so the answer was, okay, well, then we're going to isolate. And then COVID happened, and it was interesting. My response to COVID was relief, quite honestly. It
Mm-hmm.
was not relief for the world, but
No,
relief
yeah,
for
yeah.
myself that I was going to be isolated for a period of time. I
Mm-hmm.
was happy to know that I wasn't going to have to deal with other people for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean,
Yeah.
it's exhausting. It's
Yeah.
on some level to be putting out that much effort and energy. Um, it takes up a lot of bandwidth.
Yes.
Um, uh, and then obviously, you mentioned before, like I think after social stuff, really needing to like be alone.
Reset, have your
Hmm.
alone time.
Hmm.
Yeah. For me, at least, that's really important, just to
Hmm.
have that downtime, you can call it. Yeah.
Hmm. So going back to what you were discussing, the I guess dance of
Mhm.
parenting, while you yourself are trying to figure out what's going on for you and support your son and figure out what's going on for him, what are some of the complexities and
I
there?
think the biggest thing that I've learned in this journey is to stay true to yourself and trust your instincts. They don't, you know, people make jokes about mom's instinct. It's, I fully believe that parents and, especially mothers have instincts for a reason, and have most of the time spot on instincts. And no one knows your child better than you. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to remember that. So if anyone is going through kind of anything like what I went through with wondering if your child just has anything, even if it's not neurodivergence, if it's um, anxiety, or if you have an older child and you're wondering if they're depressed, just um, anything that you're feeling like your spidey sense is
Mhm.
tingling, right?
Mhm.
Like, listen to that. And
Mhm.
when people who are supposed to be experts tell you no, if that spidey sense is still tingling, go to the next person.
Mhm.
Like, don't. It's your child. You know them best. No one else is with them. And that's what I've learned. And that's what a lot of friends have, since told me, is like, you are around them 24/7 essentially, especially when they're younger, and you absolutely know them best. And experts can give their opinions, and they're not always ill-intentioned, but
Mhm.
they're not there 24/7, and they just don't see the complex picture that you see. And so you have to remember that your instincts are there for a reason, and to not let someone's titles like PhD or MD make you feel like you're just crazy, or you're
Mhm.
just anxious, or you're
Mhm.
making things up, or you
Mhm.
don't know as much because you don't have that title. Like, just
Right.
advocate for yourself and for your child, whenever you think something is going on. Because from my experience and from the experiences of a lot of people I've met, most of the time your instincts are spot on.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's gold for sure. Um, it says something really sad about the state of things, that you can't just go in with a concern and be heard. Like, and like two things or more can be true at the same time. Like, okay, so I might be anxious, but that doesn't mean
Hmm.
I'm not also correct.
Yes,
Um,
this weaponizing your mental health against someone
oh,
is that's just I can't I think that's despicable. Yeah.
man.
So when I would experience that, and then I had the hospital stay when my son was about 2, and again, I'm a therapist myself, and the feeling of I could have had an MD, a PhD, it wouldn't have mattered. I was not being listened to. I was not able to advocate for myself. I mean, just I don't understand people that are in the helping profession that don't genuinely want to help other people. And just
Mhm.
I think some people maybe get lazy or tired or
Mhm.
overworked and burnt out, but still, it's no excuse to not listen to someone, or to not give someone benefit of the doubt, or
Right. Right.
let people advocate for themselves. So, um, yeah, we have a lot of we have a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. And it's one of the many reasons I'm glad you're here and talking about this, because there is a lot of that gaslighting and people slipping through the cracks and being looked over. And sometimes people can feel so like judged or sort of like beat down that they just stop trying and end up suffering for a long time.
I don't know how many times if it wasn't for my husband and a lot of external support factors, I don't know that I would have gotten to this point of getting a diagnosis, still being here,
Mm.
still being a mom, being here to see my son grow up, quite honestly, uh, motherhood is hard.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then you add any of this stuff to it, and it's harder. So I think to turn this positive, because I don't want this to be some
Mhm.
really negative story. It's been crucial to find your support system.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think anyone who's gone through an autism diagnosis for themselves or for their child will eventually tell you, finding your community of people who they don't have to fully understand. They
Mhm.
don't have to have autism themselves. They don't have to have a kid with autism, even though that is helpful to find some friends who understand neurodivergence. Um, you can still have friends that you had before, but they have to accept your diagnosis. They have to accept you're coming to terms with it, and that you might start to change some behaviors because you're learning to stop masking.
Mhm.
Um, and so you, through the journey, might lose and gain friends and support figures, and it's just important to find those people who are going to support you in your new identity and understand. Oh yeah, she might not respond to a text right away if she's really overwhelmed, and that's okay. I know that she still cares. She's not
Mhm.
ghosting me, So
Mhm.
just having those people around you who can give you the grace and can understand enough what you're going through and support you through it is it makes all the difference. And the isolation factor of new being a new parent, and then for me, we talked about the isolation being really big, and COVID hitting, and so that was hard. And only now that my son is, almost 5, have I finally started finding true friends who
Mm.
I can kind of count on, and I found through autism diagnosis, I've gotten more connected to the local autism community, and
Okay, great.
where there's a lot of events you can go to, and so just
Yeah.
getting really connected with that community once you get your diagnosis is also
Mhm.
really, really important too, I
Are
think.
there are there websites or things that you would recommend for, like, if people are learning about themselves? I'm
Hmm.
speaking really specifically of like the late diagnosed moms
Yes.
crew.
Oh gosh.
Uh, are
So
there
I
resources yet?
Yeah, th- there's not a website yet that I would say. I think there's a lot of individual therapists and psychologists who
Mm,
put out helpful pages on their websites.
mm,
Um, there's not one, there's a few locally for me,
mhm,
but there's not one nationally that I would be like, oh, this is a great
mhm,
for women resource. For better or for worse, have gotten most of my connection to psychologists and those who are kind of on the forefront of researching autism in females and mothers, through Instagram.
mhm.
Um, so, if people want to follow me on Instagram, and I repost a lot of helpful things that I
Okay,
find, a lot of
great.
pages that I find. That's just how I've gotten connected to a lot of great psychologists and therapists who are kind of working to better understand
Hmm.
kind of how autism presents, especially in women and late
Yeah.
diagnosed individuals. So,
Yeah, I mean that's great. It will absolutely direct people to your Instagram, AUDHD_mother.
yeah, the term for autism and ADHD together.
Mm-hmm.
AUDHD, audio, yeah, yeah, that's my,
It's great.
yep.
It's great that you have that space and you're talking about it and sharing the resources, because I think more and more, especially with, having these like um sometimes difficult experiences with the care systems that are in place, you do end up trying to figure it out on your own and learning and kind of reflecting on like, oh, is that what that person's experience, is that similar to what I'm feeling? And so your resource, what you're doing today, as I said before, is extremely important. And I thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your story. And I appreciate that you're out there supporting others.
Yeah, thank you so much. If I can, my new life goal is I can help one other mom kind of realize what she's going through and get out of the fog of just
Hmm.
feeling bad and not understanding why, and really get to kind of the bottom of it like I finally did. Like if I can help one mom do that, it makes everything worth it. So,
That's awesome. Thank you so
yeah.
much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
If you would like to get connected with Lynn, you can go to her Instagram page at AUDHD_mother. So you can see some of the stuff that she's posting, some of the resources that she has, and hopefully join in on the community that she's creating, where moms who are newly diagnosed with autism and ADHD can find community, find understanding, and find the support that is so needed in trying to figure out how to parent and how to understand yourself. And please take a moment to go right now to the podcast platform you're listening on and rate this show. The more people who rate this show, the more people who will find it. And it's really, really important, especially with stories like Lynn's, that people can find this resource so that they can know they're not alone and find their path to healing. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.